Hi, everyone. Welcome to Activating Genius, how to get your child into a top college and set for a happy, successful life. Today, we have the good fortune of having Stephanie Hsu on our telesummit. Stephanie is the founder and CEO of AdmitC, a searchable database of crowdsourced student admissions data that matches applicants with accepted college students to make better decisions. In high school, Stephanie founded an educational charity focused on funding education access for low-income female students. Her passion for access to education and information led her to pursue an early career in journalism. Having worked at CNN and NBC, she joined a financial news startup in New York City after graduating from Duke University. During that time, she served as an alumni interviewer for her alma mater, sowing the seeds for her interest in college admissions. Stephanie went on to attend the University of Pennsylvania, where AdmitC was selected as one of 8 finalists in Wharton's business plan competition. She graduated from the University of Pennsylvania with a law degree and a Wharton certificate in 2014. Despite passing the New York bar, Stephanie turned down her law firm job offer to work full-time on AdmitC and joined the accelerator Imagine K-12 Y Combinator shortly after that. In 2015, Stephanie was named one of Forbes 30 Under 30 in the education industry and one of 9 female founders to watch in 2017. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Please tell us a little bit about AdmitC, because a lot of our listeners don't know about it.
Sure. So you gave a really great synopsis of what it is that the platform does. We're essentially a database of crowdsourced application files that have been shared by college students. But aside from all of their materials that they include, which, they have their essays, their grades, their test scores, extracurricular resumes, aside from all of that, they also include their insight, so any advice they have about applying to college. And the idea of that is to help students who may not be as familiar with the process, whether they're the first in their families to apply to college, or even if they do know people who've gotten in, to really find people that are similar to them and share similar interests and goals and backgrounds to better guide them with actual student insight. And so that's really I would say what AdmitC is about, is allowing college students who've gone through the admissions process to share their own personal insights with younger students who resemble themselves. And the impetus for this idea really arose when the team was in grad school, and we were considering the graduate application process we thought would be easier, having gone through the undergrad process, and it turns out that it was just as convoluted and just as stressful. So we're basically repeating what our process was like for applying to college, and so we're like, there must be a better way to do it. And we thought that with more information, we would be able to better empower students and the people that are working with them, whether it's their counselors or consultants or their parents, to actually utilize and leverage the data that's out there to really, I think, improve their decision making, and of course, as a consequence, their chance of getting accepted.
Great. So can you give us an idea of, for example, how many profiles there are on your platform?
Yeah, so we have over 80,000 college student profiles on our site that include accepted applications as well as rejected applications, because it's also interesting to look at rejection data and see if there are sort of insights that we can pull from that. So so over 80,000 and growing.
Okay. So if I'm a high school student and I would like some guidance on the college admissions process, I can go onto your website and then look for people who might be similar to me, and then see where they got in, and kind of gauge my chances of where I should apply to and what my chances are of getting in.
Yeah, exactly. I would say there are a couple different ways to use the site. There are those who are not really sure, what the best fit or the school that they would have the best shot at. So if they're still exploring which schools to apply to, then what we would suggest is looking up profiles of students that are similar to you. So you can use our search to find people that are within your GPA range, majoring in something you're interested in. You can search by extracurricular. You can search by geography. So you can really start to narrow down to find people who are similar to you and kind of see what their application process was like, but also the schools that they were interested in. So that's one way. And then the other way a lot of students come to us is they already have a school in mind, or a handful of schools, and they want to find people that have been accepted to those schools. And usually you can also filter down to find people who are similar to you, but that's also a good way for our users to figure out what the range of students that get accepted to that school looks like, what a typical student looks like, and sometimes even reconsider whether a school is right for them, depending on the profiles that they might see that are represented from that school.
Okay, wonderful. Excellent. So you've amassed, I understand, quite a bit of data because you've gotten 80,000 students to share their information on this platform. Can you share with us some of the takeaways for students applying to top universities, how they can increase their odds of admission?
Yeah, I think one of the best ways, or the ways that our users are utilizing our site, is really looking at the essays. And one of the things that we're able to do with our all of this data, because we have over 80,000 profiles, but each profile contains hundreds of data points that we've been able to collect. And what's interesting about the sort of data analytics process is that we can analyze the essays that have been accepted or the essays that have been rejected from schools to determine different types of trends, or maybe what's common that we've seen, and then for the student to understand if they want to fit into what they see as sort of a trend, or if they want to actually stay away from that. So I would say one of the big takeaways that we've seen with all of our essays is if you're going to approach a potentially controversial topic with your essay, then there's a very sort of specific tone that you want to strike, a balanced tone. And I think that's also something that I'm sure for students that are working with experts on this, they're going to talk about. But I do think that that's something that's pretty apparent when you come onto the site and you're reading example essays. You'll see that for the ones that really go out on a limb and take a risk talking about something that's maybe potentially considered a little bit too personal, those essays are done in a way that's very measured and very tactful. So yeah, I think there's a lot that we can actually look at on the application side, whether it's with the qualitative aspects of essays or extracurricular resumes, down to the more traditional quantitative things that we can look at with students.
Wonderful. Yeah. I know that there's a saying to be careful when talking about religion and politics, and these days there's just so much polarity and controversy. So I agree with you. It's definitely good to be measured, and it's interesting that the data corroborates that. So
yeah,
that's very interesting.
For sure.
Yeah. Good. Any other insights you can share with us from your research?
Yeah, we can definitely dive into the essays a little bit more, but I do think that, before we get there, what we can look at is, aside from the essays, is also trends in a student's sort of grade trajectory. So that's something we've looked at a bit as well, is to see which schools are actually potentially more forgiving of lower grades, or grades that maybe started out low but then eventually improved. So especially at top schools. So that's something that I think a lot of our users would find to be extremely valuable, is that sort of analysis of grades. And we've also looked at extracurriculars as well. So we have analysis around different types of leadership, around at what point maybe doing too many extracurriculars is actually potentially it's a diminishing margin of return. So once you get to a certain point, like if you continue to add on, it actually doesn't really help as much. So that type of analysis we've been able to do.
Interesting. Is that very specific? You could do that research for each college that you're interested in?
Yeah, that's something that we are actually planning to add to our suite of data insights. But it's coming soon. But definitely, I think it's interesting to look at that type of data. Let me think.
Yeah.
And I think, around the advice too, I think there's a lot that can be done around advice, and so we see a lot of students, the number one thing our college users actually say that they regret is not starting their essays soon enough, or not.
Interesting.
Yeah, okay. So kind of crowdsourcing that sort of data as well to kind of help our younger students better prepare and start earlier.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, it's crunch time at the moment, and I still have some of my students working on their essays last minute, so I can totally understand that. A lot of them have worked on it over the summer, and they're ahead of the game, but a few of them are still lagging. So it's stressful when you're trying to do that during school, during your school year, when you have homework.
For sure.
And so forth. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one other thing to add, there are a few students that that's the number one cited thing that they wish they had started earlier. But some students actually also point to the fact that if you start earlier, you also have the ability to kind of take that essay and revise it and really tailor it to even scholarship applications. So for some students, that's important with scholarship deadlines that are around the same time as application deadlines. That's something to consider, is to have a few different drafts that you can work with, not just for the application part, but also for potential scholarships or awards that you might be interested in.
Right, definitely. Tell us a little bit about some of the research you've done comparing essays from girls and boys. I understand there's some differences when you look at gender. Is that right?
Yes. So we've done some essay analysis that look at different types of schools. And so we see different topics faring better at more technical schools, or maybe with the Ivy League. But we also broke it down by gender. So one of the things that we found comparing, male versus female applicants is that male applicants are about 120% more likely to discuss their athletic achievements than their female counterparts. And
Interesting.
I guess it's not super surprising if you consider just the general arc of essay topics, where when we think about achievements, where are they typically gathered? There's a lot of athletic achievement, and then I think most people that kind of come across this stat, they're like, oh, okay, that's not too surprising. But I think the difference in the percentage is what's surprising to me, that it's that much more likely to be written about by a male student. But I do think that, that obviously it's not a reflection of, our boys just participating in more sports. No, right? Like, we don't see that. But it is interesting in that it's kind of a reflection of sort of the expectations of the different types of achievements that are expected of male students versus female students in high school. And if you, I guess in college as well, if you extrapolate that, where, athletic excellence is more of like, it's something that's really celebrated amongst male students. So sort of our hypothesis around that is that when you, for our male applicants, when they think about a significant achievement, it's much more societally ingrained to like go to, and that's athletic achievement. But yeah, I think that's kind of a reflection of just a systemic bias that has continued into the sort of application realm. Another finding was that female students were more likely to write about overcoming adversity, such as, the death of a loved one or struggling with mental health and depression. These topics were more popular with, or more likely to be written about by our female students. And I think there's some of that as some of like the systemic stuff as well that ties in with that a little bit. If we consider just like how males are, especially growing up, when we consider like language development, there's a lot more with younger, when you're younger, female kids, girls develop their language skills earlier. And so a lot of them are talking about sort of difficult like childhood memories, which, yeah, so that's something that we thought, in terms of recalling like adversity around childhood, that is something that's more prevalent amongst female students. And then the last one I wanted to bring up was male students tend to write about their leadership experience a little bit more. So they're like 27% more prevalent in essays that are written by male applicants. And this is actually coupled, it goes hand in hand with also writing about a failure or a mistake. So males are more likely to write about leadership, so places like where they've been able to shine, but they've also talked about a failure or mistake in that leadership position. So kind of interesting that those two are sort of coupled. But yeah, I think those are the big findings that we had. Sorry, hopefully it's there's a little bit of rambling in terms of trying to describe it and explain it, but hopefully that helps to give a little bit of context around how other students are considering their essays and the topics that they're writing about. And maybe it's something that for listeners, for students that are planning to apply, it's something that they can either utilize, sort of fit in with that trend, or maybe buck the trend and do something different.
Yeah, it's very interesting to consider that. I think it's just a personal matter, but I know like when I work with students, if I see a young woman who's got a lot of potential and interest in STEM fields, I will encourage her to write about that because there's so few women in science and math and engineering. So it's and I know that colleges are really looking for young women to enter that field, and to join their engineering colleges and so forth. So yeah, it's very interesting because a lot of what students want to do is stand out from the crowd. So
Totally.
that's part of it. And of course, if that's not real for you, you can't write about it. But I look for that in the guide students. So it's really interesting to hear about your findings. Very interesting. Tell us a little bit about some of the other data science work you guys have been doing. I know, for example, there was something about you were collecting data on colleges, like 5 adjectives to describe various colleges, and then 5 adjectives students would use to describe themselves, and then see if those match up somehow.
Yep. So one of the things that we have our college students do when they create their profiles is to answer a question about the 5 adjectives that describe a typical student at their school, or how they would describe their student culture. And we've been able to sort of aggregate all of that data for students at all the schools that we have on our site. And then the idea is that we can start to utilize that information to paint a picture of what a typical student looks like at each school. And so, so for example, if we're looking at NYU, the major adjectives that come up for that school are independent, diverse, creative, driven, and intellectual. So we can start to paint a picture for each school to determine kind of is this a sort of student body that really embodies the values that you appreciate. And then what we're doing in terms of recommending schools is for a high school student to then come onto the site and describe themselves or what they would like, the 5 adjectives that best describe them, and then utilize that to match that with the adjectives that we see at each school to find fit for the high school student. So as I mentioned, a lot of it is ideally around like the values. So if you value diversity, for example, then NYU, that's one of the top 5 adjectives that come up is, it's a diverse student body. So NYU might be a good fit for you to consider. So that type of work where we're looking at the very qualitative aspects of applying to college and really leveraging sort of the personal individual know-how of our college students to then grasp a much larger picture based on each of their personal anecdotes or personal experiences. I think that's the bigger picture of what we're trying to do is to really take each individual experience, but do that on countless occasions with different students across a wide range of students and schools and campuses, and then be able to kind of look at that at a higher level to help our high school students make better decisions.
Yeah, that is really fascinating, actually. That kind of research is really, really interesting to me because it's hard for students to know where to start looking for the right fit college. There's 4,000 universities, and so this could definitely help guide them in the right direction. And so much of that is about who the student is and then what the culture is of that school, too. So I find that really interesting. And this is a feature that will be coming forth soon on your platform?
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah, and And I think, sort of to add on to that, your point about students not really knowing, I think a big part of that stems from just a lot of these schools look the same. If you're looking at brochures, or if you're looking at the words that the admissions offices are putting out about the schools, but that's, that's, I would say, like an external facing type of marketing material versus getting the actual insight from the students that are attending the schools. That's a very sort of different different level and a different type of data that you're getting. So ideally, that's what we're going for.
Yeah, definitely. There was one more research finding that I saw that you guys had done that I found really interesting, and it was about different kinds of schools, state schools. Seem to attract more career-driven students, and then liberal arts colleges attract more the personality-driven students, and then that's reflected in their essays as well.
Yes.
And then you've got your STEM schools, and then the Ivy Leagues were in the middle. So it seems like they want a diverse group of students.
Yeah. So exactly. We basically looked at the essays of students accepted to all the schools on our site, and clustered those essay topics into 4 different categories. So essay topics with different focuses. So the 4 focuses were personality, as you mentioned, so very individualist, talking about the identity of the student. There's a cultural focus, which talks more about the larger society, cultural values, anything that's sort of related to maybe even like pop culture, for example, on a more macro scale. And career was another focus. So students that talked about career aspirations, what they're interested in studying, majors. And then the last one was more of a scientific focus. So sort of the opposite of cultural. We've actually, in terms of graphing it, it's on the opposite end, where so more of the STEM, more around like hard sciences. And what we found in graphing the different essay topics that were successful at a variety of schools along these 4 focuses, which we turned into a quadrant, was we found that, as you mentioned, so more the state schools were interested in essays that were more career-driven, so talked more about the students' career aspirations, which was interesting in that if you kind of look at these big state schools, a lot of them do have separate sort of colleges that are more vocational, a little bit more sort of professional skill set driven. So for these big state schools, career-focused essay topics were worked better, versus on the other end, the more personality, cultural essays were better for liberal arts programs. So those were more accepted at, more likely to be accepted at, like the Bowdoins or the Middleburys, and then the science focus we found, unsurprisingly, was for the technical schools. So for Caltech, MIT, schools that have a more technical focus, they wanted to see essays that were a little bit more science-driven. Ivy League schools are actually smack in the middle of this quadrant. So they're it's balanced, not necessarily in saying that your essay should be balanced and touch on all 4 things, but I think the idea there is that the schools are looking at a balanced set of students. So they're looking at a well-rounded student body. So maybe the idea there is that they're, admitting students that are writing about their personalities or about science or about career or about culture, to make a sort of balanced admissions class.
Yes, when they say they're building a class, that's what you can tell from your data. That's what you've gathered. That they are looking for all types of students, basically.
Exactly.
Okay. Good. Anything else you would like to share with us for the interview?
No, I mean, I think what we're trying to do within MITSE is really to utilize this data in a way that sort of empowers the students and makes them feel like they have a better idea of what they're doing. And it's not this, college admissions is not this black box that they're trying to figure out from the outside, but to shed some light on the process. But I think the takeaway is, if at any point the data becomes too overwhelming, like that's not the intent either, right? Like I think it's really to help you make sense of the process, and if the data doesn't serve you, then that's totally fine as well. And I think it's just kind of different for each student, but I definitely think that the more information, personally, I believe the more information you have, the more transparent you can then make the process. But that may not be the case for each student. So I think it's important to kind of recognize your own process and know what serves you. And I'm sure if you have anything to add to that, but yeah, I think the data is meant to support.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, actually, because I think some students would get overwhelmed, and so it's important to keep everything in perspective. It's really about your process and how can the data support, what your process is. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I understand you also have a free gift for our listeners today?
Yes. So we are offering 10% off of any of our annual subscription plans, especially for the students that aren't applying this cycle. If you're looking to apply next cycle as a junior or a sophomore, the annual plan is probably a really good way for you to gain access to profiles of students who are similar to you and not have to worry about regaining access month to month. So our annual plans are 10% off. The code is B as in boy, 10G as in girl. So B10G is the code, and it will give you 10% off when you check out.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's been wonderful to talk with you and to gain all this information and learn about the insights that you've been considering from all your research. It's really, really fascinating. Thank you so much, and we look forward to talking with you again soon.
Yep.